And all right, welcome to the Pitboss Review, the organization, the gathering, the True North Society in real life. Thanks for tuning in once again, those of you who actually care. This is Pat Pitboss, your friendly neighborhood host, joined by my quiet compadre over here, B, who will sit in the background and just shoot questions at me now and then when I need to elaborate or clarify something that I'm talking about. So yeah, I'm putting this out a little quicker than normal because we've had a little bit of an issue lately. Just a few days ago, I uploaded number 7 of the podcast, a Pitboss Review, and YouTube at first gave it an age review, which says that if you're under 18, you need to age verify. And I'm like, well, why would they do that? I don't understand. I'm just talking about society and stuff. I recognize, yes, I did upload a couple videos, a couple less than politically correct things that are happening in our society. There was one that was a stabbing, and I guess that is pretty graphic. And then there was also a large number of, gang swarming fights. This is our society, people. Like, this is the thing. This is what's been really getting to me lately. When you think about this, why is it that YouTube will censor real life, what is happening on the streets, what is happening in the battlefield, what is happening, in the schools around our country, around our society. But at the same time, you can watch Call of Duty clips, you can watch gore porn clips, you can watch Friday the 13th, Saw, Jason, Halloween, Michael Myers. You can check all of that out on YouTube, but oh my God, if you have people waving their guns around, that's really obscene. But at the same time, action movies are not going to be censored. You're going to see there's somebody behind it. This is my theory across the board. You're going to see all kinds of graphic imagery portrayed over and over, desensitizing imagery portrayed over and over with mainstream media, with mainstream television, movies, entertainment, music. One of my favorite hip-hop artists had just recently pointed out, hey man, why don't you take a look at the top 3 Apple Music hip-hop songs and see how many actually are talking about, that bitch is a hoe, or shoot that guy, or whatever, or sell crack to get away. What kind of people are profiting from that? What kind of people are profiting from the propagation of violence? But then conversely, if you show what's happening in society as a result of that propagation, you are censored. So whatever, I basically said, well, I challenge your thing. I want you to review this video. So then they just took it off. They originally said, oh, it's going to be age restricted, and then they said, we're taking it off. So I said, whatever, no big deal. I've got a Vimeo account. If you take a look, it's the old Bad Ideas, Good Stories account. So I posted that video there. There's a link. If you go to what happened to number 7 in this channel, you will see, and you can take a look at the whole chapter reading of Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers. So I uploaded. I did a little bit of a commentary, and then I uploaded I added in the section of the podcast video where it's just some personal commentary on right, wrong, history, moral philosophy, and they still age restricted that video. The worst thing in the video that they could have an issue with are the depictions possibly of young men waving around their guns like in a hip-hop video, or, and this one really got to me, examples of all ages drag shows. So it's okay for all ages drag show to be like this woman in a thong with pasties over her tits can walk with a 3-year-old, and the 3-year-old can see it, but on YouTube that's considered age inappropriate content. So it's weird that like their community guidelines are good over here but not over here. I'm starting to wonder if it's because I'm critical of modern culture, or I'm critical of modernity as kind of a, what would you say, maybe a Vedic heathen traditionalist, some pre-colonial traditionalist, perennial traditionalist, that because I'm critical of what's happening in modern culture, increasingly I'm seeing my channel being, throttled for its access. My Instagram is throttled. I've got like 500 people that follow my Instagram. I got 6 people that like my stuff regularly. That's it. 6 people. It's ridiculous. So I uploaded this video And actually, it's interesting. My band Standard Bearer also has a song called Culture in Decline, right? And originally, they said it was inappropriate content to put up on YouTube, based solely on the lyrics and the title. So I contested that, and they gave it a review, and they said, "Oops, we made a mistake." I guess those trigger words of culture in decline were enough to really set off some algorithms. So there's something interesting. I touched on this in the last video about an inversion of order in Western society, an inversion of morality. What used to be bad is or immoral or taboo is now considered the epoch, the acme of society, and what used to be considered right and good and noble in society is now considered wrong and immoral. And I find that very, very interesting. Because you see it. Once your eyes get open to this stuff, you'll see it everywhere. There's an organization called the Satanic Temple, right? And the Satanic Temple, their first inkling was like, we're a social justice atheist group dressed in goth outfits. We do some social justice protesting. We're for abortion rights. We're for like gay marriage. The one guy teabagged the Westboro Baptist Church, the gravestone of the mother of the founder. They did what they called a pink mass to turn his mom's soul gay in the afterlife. And it was a tongue-in-cheek, lighthearted haha, right? But then I started talking to these people, and I was interested in getting involved and seeing what they were about because it seemed that their ethics were on point. And then I started realizing that they were a cult. They are an ideological cult. They don't have any existential philosophy. And if you actually try to introduce an existential philosophy, you realize that they're absolute staunch materialist atheists. They don't believe in any larger motivating underlying force in reality, in the universe, and they don't believe in any higher power whatsoever. They're basically basement-dwelling neckbeard nerds that, really find a sense of belonging from being able to put on a pentagram and some black and more power to them, right? And one of my other issues was I originally really liked this idea that we should always make sure that our beliefs conform with our best scientific knowledge, because my personal belief is that true faith, old Buddhist, pre-colonial heathen, pre-colonial traditions are actually in line with the best knowledge of science. Like, you could consider traditionalism, like at least my version of traditionalism, applied biology, philosophical biology. And but then all of a sudden they start advocating for like some of the most unscientific things. Like, if you identify as something, we're going to defend your right till the end to protect it. And I'm like, but that's not very scientific. As a matter of fact, legitimately, that is twisting science for your personal belief, which is against your tenet, which says we should always follow the best science and conform our beliefs with science and never twist that. And increasingly, they were less and less scientific and more dogmatic, and they are uninterested in discussing existential issues, which to me, a religion would be about discussing existential issues. So that's just an aside. And so on our channel, I've been noticing there is right, there is wrong, there is, I guess, noble action and ignoble action. And I believe there's a lot of people that are really confusing what these two things are.
At some point, when you truly believe that there is good and evil in this world, I would much rather be called a radical in the fight against evil than a moderate. And I don't care what people will say about me. If I have...
obviously, understanding, communication, charity, and compassion are the top of a noble hierarchy. And we're going to go into hierarchy today. Like, basically, that's what this podcast is dedicated to: hierarchy, tradition, and explaining the principles that I guess pre-colonial tradition, and I guess it would also apply to colonial traditions, the hierarchies that these people or these cultures based their philosophies on, and how in the span of 40 years they've been erased, and what is bad is now good, and what is good is now bad. So I joked around about a True North society, and our band here, we sing about the True North a lot. And True North, in my world at least, is like, it's a solar path. like the path towards the sun. You're going towards the highest point that you can achieve. Like traditionally in Western Hermetic or Western philosophy, they talk about that being the North Pole. But you can apply this to, psychology, self-actualization, Carl Jung's individuation. I guess the Buddhists talk about nirvana, enlightenment, samadhi. So yeah, the true North Society would be anybody who was dedicated to doing their self-work to finally heal themselves and to evolve through the hierarchy that traditional societies put forward and achieve their own personal true north, whatever it is. And you will find it yourself. And the funny thing is, when you find it yourself, you might realize how twisted most of this materialist, hyper-materialist, superficial world is. And then you're like, well, what happened? Where did we go wrong? And if you have that view of where did we go wrong, you can't close your eyes again. So I try to discuss it. I'd like to say that like a sober consciousness is part of that. Eating healthy, exercising, communication, understanding, actually giving people the benefit of the doubt until they prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are imbalanced and unhealthy, and that was me for a very long time. Anybody that knows me knows that I was a fairly woke individual for quite a long time. And I had the motto of whatever, man, as long as it's not hurting anybody, do whatever you want. And then I started actually realizing how much doing whatever I want hurt me in my life and how I had hurt others in my life subtly and overtly. And how on a grander scale, everybody doing whatever the hell they want without any self-discipline or self-restraint is going to hurt society profoundly. So if we're talking about a society out of order, we can talk about the symptoms. Which symptoms are we talking about? What is out of order in society, right? Well, like I guess obviously you got crime, violence, addiction, homelessness. You've got rampant profiteers who don't care about anybody at the bottom. You've got collectivists that pretend we're all the same, that absolutely do away with any existential truth or divine principle. You've got all these profiteers of propaganda, I guess is really what I'd like to talk about today, where we think that we're choosing our actions. We think we're choosing our belief systems autonomously. We think that we are developing these ideas based off of our own volition. But we don't really pay attention that almost all of it is being fed to us through popular narratives. And we're talking like not just television and movies and music, but also the news. Who's paying for your news? Also your social media. There's a benefit to influencing social media, and then everybody in social media says and believes the same thing. And if you say anything against it, we have a right to scream at you. Now, this is a profoundly unhealthy attitude. The fact that you consider something like free speech a right-wing lunatic fringe idea, to contest an idea, to contest a narrative becomes fascism. I don't think you quite understand what the word fascism means. So if we take a look at, I guess, primary human motivations, right? And primary human motivations, they've been talked about in a whole bunch of different societies, We're talking like we had them in the first, I guess, philosophies that came down from like the steppe pastoralists into the Iranian areas. We've got the Rig Veda, the Upanishads, moving on to the Bhagavad Gita. You have Zoroastrianism. If you really want to follow like the evolutionary tree of philosophy, it all comes from animism. The principle of animism is a core belief that everything has an inherent nature as a small spark of a divine source, and to respect everything as being an inherent valuable thing. Now, if you went back all the way past monotheism, past polytheism, past through the rudimentary shamanism, you get to a core belief where you're an animist. And I tend to believe before even children are indoctrinated, they treat animals like cousins. They treat, their environment with a significant sacred idea. And so animism, the principle of that, coalesced into the idea of polytheism, where all of these universal natural forces they were personified by different gods. So there's thunder and there's rain. Well, that must be the god of thunder fighting against that which holds the rain. And that lightning is the weapon of the god of thunder that gives us rain. And rain is a sustaining and nourishing principle. So they humanize that those principles in the forms of gods. And there's battles and there's dramas that mirror the human thing. But if you really think about it, you're talking about the principles. So then eventually, as aside from the natural gods, the god of the river and the god of the sky and the god of the plain and the god of war, there became god of love and god of jealousy and the trickster gods. And the Hindu pantheon, polytheistic pantheon, is one of the oldest world's religion. And the three major deities, we've got Brahma, we've got Vishnu, and we have Shiva. And Brahma is the principle of creation. That's it. The principle of creation. Vishnu is the principle of sustainment, the sustaining one. And Shiva is the principle of destruction. So depending on which element that you relate the best to, that is your patron god that you worship. And each has like Shaktis and, subsets and avatars that are small distinctions within that. And they all have different attributes. But one of the oldest religions in the world, being Hinduism, also carries with it a current to one of the oldest wisdoms in the world, which is Kundalini Yoga, or yoga itself. An acquaintance of mine, Mr. Tom Billinge, wrote a really good book called War Yoga. You might have seen in some of the photos and band stuff, I got War Yoga shirts. And he really narrows it down to the first yogas were in the Akara wrestling dojos, and they would share, to train with them, you needed to have an ethical standpoint. You needed to follow a moral code. You had to have an element of self-restraint and self-denial to some degree. Be up early, doing your work, being a solid quality individual, and then you were allowed to train. You weren't allowed to be a degenerate and be training how to hurt people. So then Hatha Yoga developed out of these spiritual men that had to keep physically active and physically healthy. So they ascribed, I guess, spiritual principles to different asanas or positions, and that became a spiritual exercise. But it's all metaphor, right? It's all metaphor. Myth is metaphor. Religion is myth. Myth is metaphor. So the Kundalini Yoga principle is an evolution. It's an evolution from materialism to meeting the Brahman, the Atman to the Brahman, the individual self to the universal self. And the Kundalini Yoga, it's got 7 chakras that move up through various modes of consciousness. They depending on how woo the philosophy you want to listen to, that's, I guess, you're gonna run into some people that are like, energy vortexes, man. But you could think about these as psychological archetypes, because I tend to be a bit more of a secular-minded person. I'm a very spiritual person, but I like to speak in tangible realities as opposed to the woo. I like to speak on things that will relate to people. So, well, just like off the top of my head, and I might get some of this wrong, the Muladhara chakra, the root chakra in Kundalini Yoga, or in the yoga philosophy, it is basically the center of consciousness preoccupied with materialism and survival. Then you move up to your sacral chakra, which is governs the principles of sexuality and procreation. You move up to the solar plexus chakra, which governs the behaviors of status and power, and then you move up through your animalistic side into your spiritual human side, into the heart, which is compassion, into the throat, which is communication and understanding, into the third eye, which ideally is insight, and then into the crown chakra, which is the Brahman, or the connection of the individual with the universal, or what I would like to call the grand ecological order of things. Now, it's interesting, in Hinduism, they have this term, it's called dharma, which is translated as duty to natural law. So basically, they're saying that their belief recognizes, their goal in belief is recognizing how reality works, how the universe works, and living in accordance to it as much as possible. Now, something that's very interesting is they recognize these old sadhus, these old rishis, these ancient holy men recognized that as much as we would love to be the same, everybody is born a little bit different. Some people from certain families tend to behave a certain way. They tend to have certain attributes and skills and abilities, and other ones have other attributes and skills and abilities. And they started dividing people up according to where they belonged. And that was the caste system. Oh my God, hierarchy, oppression, no. And admittedly, I think after 1,000 years, that is not necessarily as accurate as it once was meant to be. But we cannot deny the reality that as we are born, different people have different attributes. Different people have different skills. Some people are bright, some people are dull, some people are tall, some people are short, some people are healthy, some people are unhealthy. That is not necessarily to say that one is better than the other, but I think it's safe to say if I stand next to somebody who can bench press 300 pounds and I can't, he's better at weightlifting than me. So this hierarchy of evolution from materialism to your best human self, and this was mirrored in the hierarchies of the societies that they found, right? Or that they founded. And this also is, I guess, comparable to the idea that royalty in Europe was by divine right, and the peasants were born there by God's will. Now, there was this crazy upstart. This crazy upstart came along, and his name was Siddhartha Gautama, and he was a prince that renounced all of his royalty, and he went and he lived with the holy men, and he studied Hinduism and meditation, and he came up with this crazy new theory. Actually, it's really similar to this crazy rabbi that studied with rabbi and came up with this crazy new theory named Jesus. But this guy named Buddha studied with these holy men, and he came up with this crazy new theory, and he said, any man from any walk of life can do this system of self-work and attain the consciousness of the Brahma. They can attain enlightenment. He can attain nirvana, which previously they said, well, that's only Brahman. Only the Brahmin can do that. Well, the Buddha came along and said, no, anybody from any caste of life, it doesn't matter if you're a butcher, an alcoholic, or whatever, if you go through this process of self-work, you can attain enlightenment. And he laid out the fourfold noble truth, the eightfold noble path. It's a very simple program to follow, and you do these things and profound changes happen in your life. I don't want to speak on my behalf, but profound changes have happened in my life now. I'm sober, I am drug-free, I'm in the process of slowly refining myself and getting past most of my addictions, and I advocate for everybody to do that self-work. So it's very interesting that the fathers of psychotherapy, and we're talking like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, these people also studied like the Jewish mysticism, and they studied the Hindu and the Buddhist mysticism. So Sigmund Freud was a Jewish guy. His dad was an Orthodox Jew, quite disappointed that he became secular. And at the same time, Carl Jung literally wrote a book on Hindu mysticism called Kundalini, Dissertations on Kundalini, as well as a psychological analysis and interpretation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, like the what happens after you die according to Buddhist tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So these guys are the founders of psychoanalysis. These are the guys that looked at these ancient systems and said, this is how our brain works. This is how the Buddhists saw it. This is how the Hindus saw it. This is how the old Jewish mystics probably saw it. And let's incorporate their techniques into our stuff. And they also said, wow, there's this new thing called mesmerism, and it's really interesting. We could put people in trances and do crazy things. They can remember things. We can accomplish amazing things. It's called hypnosis now, trance induction. Again, one of these ancient techniques handed down from the times of the raiding herdsmen from the Rig Veda and the Upanishads who advocated for a single-pointed consciousness. So these guys wrote down their theories on how the brain works. They wrote down their theories on trance inductions. And again, many of them still talked about the hierarchies of human motivations, specifically the psychologist Abraham Maslow. Now, there's a little bit of controversy surrounding Mr. Maslow, where actually a lady from Alberta, a professor, she claims that he took his stuff from the pre-colonial tradition of the Blackfoot First Nations, and his hierarchy of human motivations was basically stolen from Indigenous tradition, which is very interesting because here's another pre-colonial tradition that has a hierarchy of self-work. And the Abraham Maslow's what is it called? Human motivations, pyramid of human motivations, or hierarchy of human motivations. It starts at the bottom with physiological needs. It moves up to safety and security needs. It moves up to love and belonging, moves up to self-esteem. And then at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization. So what the Buddha called enlightenment, what the Buddha called nirvana, and the Hindus called Atman, and the Jewish mystics called, Keter, and the healers, the psychological healers, would call individuation or self-actualization. So these are basically archetypal principles of human motivation. And once again, we've got, like, at the very bottom, the lowest motivation a person has is his survival necessities. What I need to do to survive. I need food and I need water. I need shelter, maybe. Although shelter might move into the next level, which is safety and security. So you need to know that you're safe. You need to know you're secure. You need to know that those around you are safe and secure. And then you move into sexuality and procreation. So this is a biological imperative. Every single organism ever born, at least biologically adaptive organism, has a biological imperative to procreate and to continue on its own genetic makeup and to have some legacy of its genes, right? Once that is secured, a person can move up to status and belonging in the pack, in the herd, and the tribe, in the society that they live in. It's the same no matter what. This entire principle of status and belonging covers basically the highest rung of an animalistic urge that we have. And then you start moving on to the higher echelons of emotional needs and higher noble pursuits, which would be compassion. Now, compassion and love, not only for yourself and your family, but also, depending on how far you want to take it, for your community, for your neighborhood, for your nation, for the world, and all of this can be imbalanced. Don't get me wrong. Like, any of these can be manipulated and turned off kilter and sent to the extremes, and really toxic things can result from people intentionally or accidentally messing with these principal motivations. So after compassion, we move up to the idea of communicating with each other, listening to each other, and trying our best to understand each other, right? And then after that, we get to a point of insight, and we're doing the understanding, and it's affecting us, and we're doing our self-work. And then what I would like to call true north, because I don't know, I'm a traditionalist. I don't really ascribe to any one specific system. They all seem to make sense to me. So true north would be my highest goal, right? It's a perfect thing that I can say, this is the ideal, this is what I measure myself against, and 99% of the time I'm going to be coming up short. But it's an ideal and a goal, and someday a future me I would like to meet, and it's something to strive towards. So that's my true north. But what we don't talk about, and especially when we talk about media, we talk about Hollywood, we talk about movies, we talk about propaganda, is these primary human motivations can be manipulated. They can be threatened. They can be undermined. And these can be done by anybody who knows them and knows how to do that. Manipulating, threatening, undermining them. So I'm going to introduce a guy by the name of Edward Bernays. And if you've heard any of the old podcasts, you might have heard this before. Edward Bernays literally wrote the book on propaganda. And Edward Bernays, he was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, so he took Uncle Siggy's fucking notes, and he's like, oh, so this is what's going on. And he wrote out especially Sigmund Freud's ideas on the psychology of the mass movements, the psychology of the herd, the crowd, where one person's rational logic gets put on the back burner, and he's swept up with the movement of what everybody is doing. And so then he realized that if we tweak on those human motivations, we can influence people without them even realizing. And he wrote the book, Propaganda. You can get it affordably on Amazon by Edward Bernays. Read it. It's insane. He basically says that everything you buy, everything you are interested in, everything that you find important has been choreographed by somebody. Choreographed by invisible leaders that we don't even know exist behind the throne. They're behind the power. They're behind the products. And case in point, One example of Edward Bernays' most famous, I guess, coups, propaganda coups, when it was still called propaganda, he was hired by a cigarette company to try to get women to smoke. How can we do it? These women think it's a masculine thing. They don't want to smoke. We want to make that money. How can we get them to do it? And he realized that at the same time, I think this was the 1920s, there was a suffragette movement. Women wanting the vote, which rightfully they should. They live in this country. They should have a right to vote. And they were marching in a New York parade. And they said, okay, so here's the deal. He approached some of the debutantes, like the most influential ones. And he's like, I want you to do this. I'll make a deal with you. I don't know if it was financial or what. But he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to, right at the height of the parade, I want you to all of you pull out your cigarettes and light them at the same time, because anything a man can do, you can do as well. And we're going to call them torches of freedom. And we're going to take pictures of you, and that's going to be our new advertising. Anything a man can do, a woman can do as well, including getting cancer and dying for the profit of a few elites. So that was the big move for a while. Anything a man can do, a woman can do, and I'm going to smoke just like a man. Or maybe, this is just a hypothesis, I'm not sure. Maybe pay taxes like a man and get income tax like a man. I want in the workplace because it's equal rights to pay income tax. Anyways, so Edward Bernays, he was a principle of being able to commodify everything. Capitalism commodifies everything. And the ability to influence people to act in a certain way without their knowing, and, interestingly enough, prevent people from rising up that evolutionary scale towards their healthy, compassionate, with a self-esteem, communicating insight and self-actualized self. If you can keep people on the lower rungs of that scale in a survival mode, then they will completely cycle. They will cycle. They will buy any product that they are told is love and belonging and happiness, because they never really sober up away from that system to realize what real love and belonging and happiness is. They feel good from the tobacco, they feel good from the alcohol, they feel good from the drugs, and they feel good from the nightclubs and the cars and the brand names and everything in the mall and the junk food and the sugar, fat, and salt. And that makes them feel good, and they mistake that for joy. So they can, with propaganda, he had to change the name of propaganda to public relations after World War II, because he very much influenced Joseph Goebbels and the Nazi regime. They said, wow, this guy's book is all of his studies are totally right on. And look what happened there. They used the exact same principles. Technically, if you want to consider that this is esoteric knowledge of black magic, but I won't go off on a tangent there. They use the exact same psychological principles to herd a nation towards genocide and atrocity. You know, they conned an entire nation into allowing them to do some of the most reprehensible things out of history. And he had to change the name from propaganda to public relations. Now, another element about this, that if you understand the hierarchies of human motivations and the principles of human motivations, at any given time, you can instill a psychological or an emotional trauma into a person in order to keep them on those bottom rungs. So let's say hypothetically survival. If you could stop a person from securing their survival needs, they're going to be completely dependent. If you could stop a person from securing their safety and belonging needs, they're going to be dependent on a system. If you tell them that they have to obey or they have to buy a product in order to get laid and to have a wife or to be able to develop a family, they're going to buy your product. And if you tell them that they're never going to have status and belonging in society unless they obey a system, they're always going to obey a system. Now, the difference is if your self-actualization and your self-esteem is dependent on your merit, free from any of this external influence, you will value your internal merit free from any internal or external influence. Now, if you think that your well-being and your happiness and your joy is dependent on these external systems of exploitation for profit, then you're going to defend these external systems of exploitation for profit with your life, because that's the only joy you have. You're going to defend the brand names. You're going to defend the latest model car. You're going to defend the mansions. You're going to defend capitalism because you think that that is succeeding. When people say things like, I will someday be financially free, it really makes me wonder, financially free of what? It kind of implies a financial slavery until you can be free. And this is a very interesting principle, because once you start paying attention to the popular media and what they try to sell you and how they're trying to sell it to you, you start dissecting who is behind this and what is the incentive for them telling you this. Are they trying to tell you that your survival is at risk, that you could die? Are they going to tell you that your safety and security is at risk? That, the foreigners are coming, or, the big bad man is going to get you, or the big bad political ideology is coming? What are they scaring you with? Are they telling you that you're never going to get laid? That you're unattractive the way you are, that you cannot find love? Are they going to tell you that your status and belonging isn't going to fit into the mold if you question or if you are outside the norm? Of course they do, because it's in their vested interest to make money off you by keeping you cycling on the lower rungs. So I advocate a system where we look at these human motivations and slowly rise up them as much as possible. We try to recognize, well, man, my basic needs are met, my security is met, I've got a person that loves me, I've got my status in my family and my job and my community. Wow, I'm pretty well off. So where do I go from here? Well, focusing on loving my family and loving my community, that's not that hard. But that's just it. If they could stop you from doing that, they could take the traditional values away. And it doesn't matter which tradition it is. If you think about it, Christianity taught these same principles. Buddhism taught the same principles. Hinduism taught the same principles. Short of the monastic people that say, oh, you need to be celibate, right? Because we're trying to get free of every addiction. But once you've got that self-actualization trip on the go, and you're doing your self-work and you're actually valuing what you have, and you're practicing a practice of gratitude for what you have, and you aren't constantly in this cycle of want, need, disappointment, then you step outside. And actually, if you consciously start boycotting a lot of the things that they try to sell you as being important, you are actually progressing on this system. You are on the ladder. Actually, that's very interesting. Depending on the system, some people use the pyramid model, some people use ladder, some people use a tree, there's a pole, and all of them are northward bound. And there's a hierarchy between noble action, righteous action, and degenerate action. So if we think about it, if we got materialism and superficial materialism at the bottom, what happens when you go deeper than that? And you don't believe anything is higher than materialism. And you don't believe that anything is more important than your selfish pleasure. How degenerate, what kind of action would you go to if such was the case? How far would you dive into some of the most hedonistic, libertine, disgusting behavior if you only think materialism is real and there is nothing noble or nothing existentially divine to reach towards as your highest true north goal? This is what we're talking about when we talk about a generative, an aspiring current towards your highest self, or the degenerate de-evolution towards, I guess, addiction, debauchery, hedonism, sense pleasure, and sinking into whatever feels good is right. Now let's think for a second. If you do whatever feels good, let the consequences be damned, how are you going to end up? A drug addicted, alcoholic, food addicted, obese, sex addicted, porn addict in their basement, never doing anything difficult in their life, never saying no to yourself because you only do what feels good? Now, is that on the same level as the person who is carrying 3 bags of their children's athletic gear in and out of the hockey rink at 7 a.m. to make sure their children are healthy and they have a sense of community? No, those are not the same moral value. The person that sacrifices themselves for the greater good is not on the same moral value or this moral level as the person that sacrifices the greater good for themselves. And unfortunately, we've lost this principle in contemporary society. The popular influence of hip hop culture, and I get it. When a people have nothing, anything is something. And so there is that hyper superficial materialism in poverty environments. But here, I don't live in a poverty environment, and I see a lot of that influence happening on people with a lot of things going for them. They aren't oppressed as they think they are. I just watched a video today where, do you know that 1 in 5 people in Russia shits in an outhouse. They have to go out in the cold. They don't have running water. They don't have a flushing toilet. 20% of Russia still uses outhouses. How privileged are you that you don't have to do that? You're listening to this on some device, on some electronic device, whether a phone or a computer or, maybe a Bluetooth or something. Wow. There's people that don't even have, a vehicle or a bicycle to carry water back to their hut. Recognize your privilege with a little bit of gratitude. So I'm going to dial it back or rewind a little bit. Any of those human motivations that we're talking about can be balanced by hyperactivity or inactivity, right? You can have a hyperactive survival impulse where you hoard and you're a glutton and these can be a result of trauma. Or you can have an underactive survival impulse where you put yourself in dangerous situations, and you might have eating disorders where you voluntarily starve yourself, or you allow yourself in dangerous situations. You just don't care if you live or die. And either of those are imbalanced elements of the survival principle. You might move up to safety and belonging, or safety and security. You could be hyper fixated on your security, or you could be under fixated on your security and consistently be victimized. When you move to your sexuality, it's quite obvious what a hypersexual imbalance would look like. You're porn addicted, you're sex addicted, you're maybe even predatory. You have toxic behavior when it comes to sexuality. Or you could have an underactivated where you're an incel, or you're asexual, or you maybe don't associate with your gender and you want to have sexually maladaptive relationships, where that's cool. Love who you want, but you're not going to procreate. Then you could have an overactive obsession with status and belonging and where you fit in society or your tribe, or an underactive one where you are a basement dwelling, jogging pants everywhere, you never shave, your hygiene's horrible. These are, either one can be imbalanced and put out of harmony with the other ones. So with propaganda, people can manipulate those. They can manipulate those impulses. They can manipulate those core archetypal principles of the human psychology for their own ends, and we're not even paying attention. So there's a couple of really good books. Change Your Brain, Change Your Life by Dr. Daniel Amen, and also Dr. Gabor Mate in the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And both of these books talk about the principles of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, just like meditation, science, it explains that where your attention goes, energy flows. So the more you pay attention to something, that's automatically where your brain will go. And the less you pay attention to that thing, even though that's a hard path to tread to get away from those habits that you love, it's almost like going through a 5-lane highway or an overgrown path in the forest. Yeah, you're going to get twigs in your face, but you know that overgrown path is where you need to be, and you need to let that 5-lane highway overgrow, especially if you realize that you have toxic manifestations of these principal archetypal motivations. So if you're imbalanced, you need to work towards balance. You need to work towards a center line. If you're a porn addict or addicted to anything, you just need to stop. You need to stop, and it's a hard path to walk, and sometimes they're very, very subtle, those addictive tendencies. They sneak up on you. Oh, one won't hurt. It doesn't matter what it is. One porn video, one drink, one line of Coke, one candy bar. It's okay. You're good. You're doing your self-work. We'll call it self-care. And it's not really self-care, because self-care is legitimately self-denial and forcing your brain to forge new neural pathways as opposed to the ones that are so used to using, and forcing yourself not to use the neural pathways that you're used to using when you know that they're causing unhealthy consequences. And the goal of all of this is health, and the goal of all of this is to be the best human being you could probably be. So I really wonder when our communication and our understanding of each other takes a back burner to wanting to be right all the time. Now, I know I suffer from it too. I'm not pretending that I'm above it all. I'm a work in progress, because I do believe in right and wrong, and I do believe in hierarchy, and maybe I'll get bit in my ass. Someone along the line will actually really check me. But these people that want to go online with their wall of texts You know, they've got no boundaries, no too much information filter. You got the Karen and the doormat, the people that allow themselves to be walked over and the people that walk over everybody else. The people that are screaming without listening. They're so much invested in being right. How much imbalance is that? And this is the time we're living in. You know, the Hindus also talk about the principle of Kali Yuga, the last age. They also called it the age of quarrel, if you're familiar with the Cro-Mags album. The age of quarrel is when brother is against brother. When the spiritual traditions have taken a back burner and everything is inverted. So there is a movement of people that really do believe we're living, well, I guess the Greek Herodotus, I believe, had the 4 ages. The age of iron is what he called. Iron age is what we're living in. And that is the equivalent of the Kali Yuga, according to Hindu philosophy, where we've abandoned our connection with the divine ecological order of things, with the Dharma, our duty to the natural law, and we've replaced it with egotistical self-aggrandizement, self-fulfillment, self-pleasure, and even at the expense of everybody else. So where do we get these ideas from? Where does this come from? Now, I guess I'm lucky in the way that I listened to ragey punk rock for most of my life. I'm still part of ragey punk rock. And ragey punk rock is anti-authoritarian to a large degree, but it's also questioning status and norms. Lots of conscious hip-hop is like that, but unfortunately it's overshadowed by super hyper-materialistic and violent hip-hop and disrespectful hip-hop, misogynistic hip-hop. And it makes me wonder, so these people that are in the upper echelons of the entertainment industry, we've got television, we've got Hollywood, we've got the music industry. This is all propaganda, public relations, and it's sold as entertainment and is really run by some of the most manipulative degenerates you'll ever meet. There's this documentary called An Open Secret that really, it exposes so much of the horrific abuse of children going on in Hollywood, where they'll get some young man from Ohio and they get him to come to Hollywood to get the gigs. They get him a few gigs, and next thing you know, they're introducing him to alcohol and drugs and creepy producers who they wake up next to, like naked, after they've been drugged and boozed up. So that's an open secret. I don't know. If I could find a link, I'll put it in the description of this podcast. So if Hollywood is no longer just entertainment, it's propaganda, we really have to wonder who is the highest bidder that they are propagating what they are for, right? I don't believe that these media conglomerates are any longer art imitating life. It isn't art saying this is what's happening in the streets. It's life imitating what they are putting out. And the value system that our culture, the inverted value system that our culture is living by, has largely been and continues to be programmed by these media celebrities, these Hollywood, these music, these fashion, people like the Kardashians, people like Paris Hilton. What value do these people have in any real sense other than that they have money? They are valueless. These are puppet plastic people. Like, what value do they give us? Like, their music isn't even music anymore. It's pre-programmed, like, computer algorithm.
Tell a nigga don't dick ride, don't blink ride, leave it to the double thick thighs, twin sisters. Drop it down and wobble up, mommy boot it up, she get down and gobble up, cause my money up. Slide in the belly trucker, the rave trucker, your bestie is a dick sucker, a big double, assalamu alaikum, you big hater, you nothing but a hater, cloud chaser. Now we catch him at the chicken spot, up a couple chops, pop that nigga with 100 shots, they didn't make that nigga diddy bop.
Like the new SoundCloud rappers, they don't even rap. They don't even rhyme their stuff. It's the most ridiculous sludge I've ever heard being propagated as art. And then we've got a dumbing down of a culture as a result of people that say, well, that's what I'm supposed to do. That's what I'm being spoon-fed. My goal is to look like a Kardashian, sound like Paris Hilton, be some random degenerate from Hollywood, maybe be a sports star, whatever the case may be. But what value do sports stars have? Like, admittedly, yes, they are athletic, they are exceptional physical specimens, but do they deserve $60 million a year? $14 million a year? Now, if you think that that's exorbitant, we really got to take a look at who's behind the sports teams and who owns those franchises. So the sports athletes, they don't own the merchandising rights. They're not making money off of those hats you buy and the jerseys you buy and the jackets you buy and the beer cozies you buy. The person behind the scene is making that. And they're making millions off of every single player. They aren't making millions like the players. They're making millions off of every single player. And these people that are running the media, running the sports, running the entertainment, running the music industries, they don't give two shits about your personal values, your ethnicity, your religion, your identity. They care about your money. And if they can possibly mold Western society in a direction that is most profitable for their shareholders, they're going to do whatever it takes. They're going to tell you that they're super down with LGBTQ rights if you're going to be buying the product, and they realize that people are waking up and not buying the product. Those people become the enemy. And it doesn't matter. Black Lives Matter. Yes, they do. Absolutely. Black Lives Matter. Police fucking brutality against innocent black people. Like, it needs to be shut down. We need to figure out a solution. But the Hollywood has been profiting all through the 90s on black crime by propagating gangster narratives, both in music and in Hollywood. So on one hand, they'll say they say they want to shut down gun crime and ecological, degradation, but they're still profiting from gun crime in movies. And all of these Hollywood elites are living in mansions with their jets, and they're doing all the jet setting. These people aren't sacrificing a dime for the greater good. You don't need a grand conspiracy if your interests align. So the hip hop moguls that are profiting off of gangster rap, telling kids to go shoot each other and sell crack, have the same interests as those that are running privatized prisons. It may not be a conspiracy, but their interests definitely alive. And gun manufacturers and bullet manufacturers. So they don't really want gun crime to stop. They don't want gang crime to stop, because then the guns and the crime and the hip hop won't sell so much. So it's a vicious cycle. Hollywood, you will rarely see an expose about degenerate child abuse. You won't see a movie about the oppression of Palestine. You'll rarely see an expose of corrupt bankers or war profiteers, because these are the same exact individuals that are financing the propaganda coming out of these agencies. They don't want you thinking. They don't want you questioning. They want you consuming. And as long as you're a consumer, which we are, North America is the consumer nation. There's producer nations and there's consumer nations, and we are the gluttonous consumer. So yeah, YouTube censored my last podcast because apparently it had images of violence. But they aren't censoring the war films. They're not censoring the gore porn. They're not censoring the Texas Chainsaw Massacre clips or Call of Duty or gangster rap, like drill rap. You can see all of this stuff with these guys shooting each other up, chopping each other up, simulated, of course. But it's not like the simulation was desensitizing our youth. And you wonder where school shootings come from. Some media conglomerate got a lot of hits from people wanting to see that expose on the school shooter, didn't they? And the serial killer and everybody else, to the degree that they make these fucking assholes celebrities. So they propagate it. They make money from it, and they pretend that they care. And they will propagate vice and moral corruption as long as profit is there to be made, because capitalism commodifies everything. This is something that we all need to look at and pay attention to. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on Instagram, Pat Pitboss, or here on YouTube. Like, subscribe if you want to hear more TED Talk ranting about this stuff. I really appreciate the few people, like 2 or 3, that might be interested in this stuff. But thank you, and come back, and hopefully together, True North Society, we can make a change. Peace, love, and granola, people. Thanks for coming out.